When you're able to communicate effectively, you're much more likely to get what you want. And I know it sounds like such a fundamentally simple concept, but it is one that I don't think we can be reminded of enough because all too often human beings are frightened or pressured or intimidated out of communicating directly and honestly and openly. And it is so fundamental to our nature, and it is so important that we consider this not just in the context of our own lives or in the context of our families or our friends or those around us, but really in the context of this global struggle to advance humanity that we're all so privileged to be a part of. It really is incredible to think that it is what fundamentally makes us unique as human beings is our ability to communicate with each other. And now, I mean, what makes the internet so amazing and so powerful and so significant in society is that it's this incredible communications device. All of a sudden, everybody is connected, and we see the impact already. I mean, how much better is life on Earth in just the last couple of decades because the internet has flourished. And I think back, maybe this is kind of too much of a single example, but when Obama was trying to convince America for boots on the ground in Syria, and it was like, no, I don't think so. And you saw the military in revolt with all the selfies, with the messages, that became the thing, right? I mean, that was, and if it wasn't for the internet, first of all, not only would people not feel comfortable coming out and challenging what is the authoritative narrative from the President of the United States, the great commander-in-chief, but that there was also an incredible historical perspective that was brought to that conversation, because not only were we able to communicate about it, but the entire wealth of human information was right there at our fingertips on the internet. The history of the Iraq War and was all there. You couldn't ignore the lessons. And I think the impact of the anti-war movement of Iraq and Afghanistan was really measured in the reaction to Syria, not in the way those already made mistakes that society just really as a whole couldn't fess up to in real time. But the lesson has been learned now in a way that in the past, central authority figures or bullies or anybody else who would try to manipulate you or manipulate communication would prevent that communication that needed to happen to prevent a war from happening. But it's so much broader than that, so much deeper than that. And when you're able to communicate without fear of judgment by another person, when you have that fundamental self-confidence, and it's really a practice in communication, a skill that you can develop, and you don't have to be, have perfect self-confidence to be a perfect communicator. But when you communicate as if you do, you're no longer a victim for everybody who would try to stifle your communications, whether it's in an interpersonal relationship or with a parent or with a government or any other authority figure. You just simply don't have to worry about that when you're able to always express yourself fully. That's not going to happen. At least that one very critical means of manipulation you are somewhat immune from. And I read a book recently, Nonviolent Communication, Marshall Rosenberg, highly recommend it. And it talks about communicating needs and wants and desires and communicating without judgment. And for those of you that know what Adam versus the Man is about, I hope you can kind of get a sense of where this whole conversation is going, right? In terms of its relevance to what we believe as people who want to see the world made a better place through the adoption of the philosophy of universal nonviolence, or rather, the conclusion that we come to from a philosophical examination of the world around us, that nonviolence is a better way for society to be organized than through the coercion of government. So I just want to kind of give one more example, and this is from my recent experience, and this is really not the most relevant part for me, but being on a dating website, you're able to communicate so much about what you want. I mean, and I've had these conversations. I've gone on dates with a few dates with women that I've met from OkCupid here in LA, and the conversation about it is always just it is like, you think about the contrast to before we had online dating, before we had modern communications. Like, what was the process of finding a life partner? Well, we stumbled into each other drunk at a bar one night, and well, we didn't really know anybody else in our town, so we just sort of were like stuck in this, and we went along with it. With multiple women that I've gone on dates with, we have actually stopped to make fun of people for their, haphazard approach to dating. And the difference is communication. And I'm sure everybody listening knows someone in their life who is suffering in a relationship where it's obviously based on a communications problem. I mean, doesn't everybody know someone who's in a marriage where they're miserable, where it's just like, if they could just talk? Who? Most marriages as a whole, yeah, possibly. And actually, you could probably say that all marriages, all interpersonal relationships, period, could benefit from improved communication. I mean, there are very few. I mean, when you understand, if you've read the book, if you consider these issues, and you really, I don't mean to say it's all about this particular body of thought, but it should be a pretty obvious observation that very, very, very few relationships meet a perfect standard of communication where needs are expressed, judgment and violent assessment of another person is not brought into it, where you're communicating openly and directly, and you're able to, in what we would describe as the ultimate capitalistic sense, have a free exchange. And this is so, like, we talk about capitalism as, the capitalist ideal, where all human relations are free and voluntary, free of force, fraud, and coercion, and people engage because they believe it's for mutual benefit. Well, when you have better communication, those relationships in that economic sense, and really, as we like to say, everything is economics. The fact that you're listening to me right now means that you value what I'm saying, and you're giving me your attention, and I assume you're continuing to listen because it's valuable to you. And if we can enhance that, enhancing communication is like making capitalism better, is making communication better, is making relationships better, is making society more free. Because, it is so fundamental to government, to oppression, to statism, to controlling and manipulating and suppressing free, open communication. And this goes to how the government, uses a different form of language that it really forces on us. And I take that back. The language isn't forced on us, but we are stolen from through taxation to fund media outlets and corporatism and all the other things that go into government-sponsored control of the conversation and all the other propaganda that really does affect how we communicate. And because those are the authorities, we are all susceptible to falling into that. In fact, that's if we did not fall into that language paradigm of conflict, and of obtuse communication, of obfuscation, of distorting the potential for harmonious relationships, then they wouldn't be the authority figures. But as long as they're the authority figures, everybody's kind of going to buy into that and at least talk like them. And I have to catch myself. Very obviously, how many times have you said, we invaded Iraq, in referring to America's military action there? And I can say we because I was there. But most Americans can't separate in the language themselves from the government. This is just a fundamental aspect of communication, how we relate to each other. But when you can communicate openly, honestly, from a position of your needs, your desires, what you want to do, and I found that this is very helpful in my own life. And even recently, I've been working on this skill. I spent 4 months in jail last year and said that I've matured in ways I didn't think were possible. But, having turned 30 for the third time now, I feel like I'm at a point where I could sit back and say, I'm done with my personal growth and development. I'm just going to be this same asshole for the rest of my life. But no! Humanity and Adam march on. And this is like, a big part of, I think, what I'm doing in my conscientious self-improvement right now. And I found even in business relationships, in, just talking to people, in rejecting people, telling them why, being open and honest about it. I had someone who made a business offer for me recently, and it was something, like to carry an item in our store online, which isn't even fully launched yet, but will be soon. And we decided here in the Anna versus the Man team to reject the offer. And I feared that communication. I didn't want to tell this guy because he's a friend of mine. Like, he's someone I care about. Oh, sorry, I really don't want to do business with you because your product sucks. And if I didn't know better, if my only ability to communicate was, oh, your product sucks, it's not good for us, that would have been a bad communication. That would have been something to fear and avoid. But if I can say instead, I really appreciate you offering this deal and thinking of us and bringing us into this. Product's not right for us because X, Y, and Z. And if you change those, it would be right for us. But that's exactly why, and we appreciate the offer, and that's it. And then it's a communication that I look forward to. I get to express my preference. I mean, how awesome is that? And really, that's what we're doing in all of our communications. As Marshall Rosenberg said, the only thing that humans ever are saying is please or thank you. And in a sense, if you think about it, we can boil down every single communication that we ever make between ourselves and another human being as please or thank you, unless it's fuck you, and it's some other form of incorrect communication. But even that could be, seen in that rubric. If you're saying fuck you, it's really please leave me alone, right? I mean, it's please go fuck yourself. Yeah, right. So thank you for fucking yourself. Thank you for fucking off. So there is communication that violates that is and maybe this is introducing a use of the term violence that some people might not accept, because in a sense, yes, communication is never violent. It's always preferable to physical violence. But still, the way that Marshall Rosenberg describes violent communication as being, judgmental or failing to communicate openly and honestly from that position of needs and wants and desires, or simply saying like, I want to share something with you, or I want you to know this, and the way that we ask for people's attention, it's so manipulative and it's so violent. And this, to go back to the evolutionary perspective that I like to bring to a lot of these issues, I hope the audience appreciates that, that I bring to a lot of the current events that we talk about. Emotions are our brain's way of consolidating, an incredible amount of information that we can't really express conscientiously, or that our brain is not fully capable of, like fear, the fight or flight response, right? Are you rationally processing? No, it's a way to jump ahead of that. But in the past, we've used emotions as well to communicate, and we communicate with anger and with affection and lots of other negative emotions too that, get in the way of direct open communication. But it's not like it was wrong, it was because monkeys are able to express emotions to each other and be angry. And I mean, the bonobos do a pretty good job of other forms of displaying affection. Yeah, the monkeys that fuck all the time. Okay, so there's a place for that in the human historical context of communicating rashly, of communicating violently with negative emotion, because maybe it was a shorthand. Maybe that was the best we could do. Before there was language, was it wrong for a parent to slap a kid on the back of the head, when they couldn't have any other way of communicating, hey, what you're about to do is going to hurt yourself? Well, no. And if you look at like dogs, we have dogs here, and dogs communicate in packs by nipping at each other. And that's far better than lower forms of life that don't communicate at all. So but where do we advance with this? And how does this then relate to the message of freedom? And if the message of freedom is, something that you discover as, hey, guess what? Humanity would be better off if all human relations were free of violence and coercion and fraud. Like, that's not an opinion. That's a conclusion that you come to from rational philosophical analysis of the world, of society. And I like to think back to, other paradigm shifts, because this is a paradigm shift we're going through right now, is that people are starting to realize this, and it's happening in many ways, and it's happening on different levels. It's not all people really fully embracing the philosophy based on self-ownership and the non-aggression principle. That is, you own yourself. Therefore, it's morally wrong to initiate force or fraud against you, because it's a violation of your rights as an individual, your right to self-ownership. But in all the ways that, like we see separatist movements, people demanding locally self-government, the general trend towards freedom and nonviolence is a fundamental force of nature. It is evolutionary, from multi-celled organisms defeating single-celled organisms, or out-competing. It's because the greater harmony of energy, the more success you have in terms of life force. So the more we're able to communicate, the species that are able to communicate, the individuals are the ones that survive and reproduce. And if anything, those of us who are here today are the descendants of those human beings in prior generations who were at least able to communicate well enough to get laid. So, there are people that fail even at that, and they get selected out. And that's just how humanity moves forward. But now we are evolving at a different societal level, and it is amazing to notice that we are living at the most peaceful times in human history. You are less likely now than ever before to be subject to interpersonal violence. That's an incredible, beautiful thing to be celebrated. So as a movement, as people who have realized this and say, well, how does that square with government? How is it possible that, we're doing this thing based on coercion and we're not seeing that, hey, nonviolence is superior, let's move towards that. Our message, when you compromise this message as a fundamentally moral truth of the non-aggression principle, and you get into the political realm and you compromise, and instead of advocating for freedom, you're advocating for minarchism, for limited freedom, or for something like that, or for some Republican form of government, you're really failing this fundamental communication of what you want. Because if you believe in freedom, you don't want limited freedom. You don't want, just a reduction of violence. No, you want an elimination of all organized, systematized coercion in society. You want, because it is a moral imperative to seek an end to criminal behavior. That is the exploitation through coercion that is government. And when you go into the political realm with that, you really start using statist language. It turns into a conversation of conflict, of you versus me, of I'm right and you're wrong. And for the historical context here, I'd like to bring up one more important historical event, the invention of toothpaste, or maybe the toothbrush. But at some point, some human being realized, hey, guess what? If you brush your teeth, you're less likely to get cavities. Maybe that's not a good one. Maybe that one evolved too naturally, organically. But the first guy that really got that didn't go around saying, hey, how dare you not brush your teeth? That's wrong, you silly statist, you. No, it was like, hey, check this out. Check this out. I want to share this with you. Okay, maybe like running water, showers, right? Like that was more, that didn't come naturally. That had to be figured out, right? Cleaning teeth, maybe that was kind of a natural thing. You're going to chew bark. I think of all the primitive cavemen, what they were doing to clean their teeth. It probably happened in lots of different places. But no, like running water, no, that was, that you could pinpoint, the guy that first thought of that, hypothetically. And, the people that started working on that and that brought that technology to better humanity. And really, that's what we're doing. What do we want? What do we want? Freedom! When do we want it? Now! No, yelling in the streets is not going to do it, people. It's not. It's really not. What do we want? We want a society that respects our right to self-ownership, because we want our own will to be respected. We want to be free. That respects the will of others through universal nonviolence, because we want to live in a society where others are free, where everybody is enriched by this state of having their will respected, not forcefully interfered with, not having their rights violated anyway. That's something we want for others. It's a beautiful thing to share as a gift. We want converts. We want others to realize this fundamental truth. We don't want to convince people of one issue. We don't want people to elect a politician. That is not the end goal, people. We do not want a law repealed. We want a moral society that is harmonious and cooperative and respects the divine individual. We want people to realize this. We want to convince people that this is the truth. The same way that once upon a time, people had to be convinced that the world was round, not flat. Can you imagine if Galileo, was it Galileo? First figured a telescope. Anyway, pardon my astronomical historical ignorance. But if you were the guy that first figured out the earth was round and you could prove it, and you were like, no, look, it's right here. Bam, bam, no. And the first guys that started talking about that, were they not persecuted as heretics? I mean, I don't know. I hope I'm not just making this up out of some dream, but people who came with this were killed, right? For saying that the world was round and wasn't the center of the universe, because it overthrew Christian doctrine. Holy shit. And that's kind of what we're facing today as libertarians. And instead of saying, no, look, just sticking to our guns, like this is the fundamental truth, don't go out and get killed for this, but you can see the parallel here. But can you imagine if Galileo said, well, the world's round, you're not going to like that? The world's not the sun's the center of the universe. You're going to kill me for that. You're going to be upset with me for that. You might not believe me if I say, how about if I say the world's just kind of football shaped and the earth is like it moves around, but the sun also moves around. Really? Like, do you think humanity would have advanced at all if we accepted that kind of muddled thinking and such clear, obvious scientific endeavors? Absolutely not. But what we are talking about as libertarians is the same fundamental concept. We're talking about applying the same principles to society. What works, what doesn't? How about a rational analysis from that objective scientific perspective? And for me, it's really simple. I want converts. I feel like the greatest value I can contribute to the world, to posterity, which is really because of my own personal gratification, because I can only live in my own head. I feel that the best I can do to contribute is to spread this message and to win converts. And I hope that communicating directly is something worthwhile for me to improve on, certainly. There's always room for improvement. And if you're still listening 23 minutes into this ramble, I hope that you're getting some value out of it. But I think everybody owes it to themselves to consider the value of communications in their life, their own personal communication skills, and what that means for you in terms of improving your relationships, but also making your life easier as a libertarian. And this goes to something I've said dozens of times now, that if we are doing this from a position of anger or conflict because we're not communicating it properly, because we're not understanding it for ourselves, a lot of communication problems are how we talk to ourselves and how we discourage ourselves, or how we believe in the negative thinking that others want to impose on us. And the big one from government is that you need us. And it's not true. And a lot of people are sort of just bullied into talking to themselves in a violent, judgmental way. I mean, how often do we judge ourselves instead of simply saying, this is who I am as a human being. I was born into this body, and these are my desires, and this is my mind, and this is what is going to make me happy. But instead, we beat ourselves up over the silliest things, the dumbest shit. People commit suicide for ridiculous reasons. We talked about Michael Rupert earlier this week as a hardcore activist who did incredible work as a journalist and committed suicide because he was communicating wrong to himself about the future of humanity. He had that negative worldview, and instead of seeing what he was doing as a gift, he saw it as, I would presume, a warning that wasn't being heeded. And when you fall into that, when you fall for that trap of, if we don't stand up for freedom now, it's 1,000,000 years of darkness and we have to ride forth and bear arms and pitchforks and storm the castles. No. That's, if you choose to be miserable now, you're guaranteed to be miserable now. But if you don't figure out that you can be happy now, freedom's not going to make you happy. Happiness is a choice. It's an outlook. And that's what causes freedom. And this gets, again, to something I've talked about before, about having the psychological freedom to choose your own state of mind. And that's about communicating directly with yourself. And when you can do that, you're going to be communicating better with others as well. All of your relationships will be better. And our movement will be a lot better off if we give greater consideration to these issues of communication that are so fundamental to human life and to advancing humanity forward to a voluntary society. And today is Friday, April 18th, 2014, and that's all the work I've done preparing for the show, so we'll see what the next hour and 35 minutes yields. I hope you are standing by to call in today, but we do have some amazing guests lined up. At 12:30, we're going to be talking to Rich Paul, who actually wrote me a letter from jail while I was in jail, and I wrote a letter back to him in jail, so we're going to get a little bit of that story. And then at 1 o'clock, we've got Danny Panzella join us from Long Island. And then at 1:15, we've got Jason Ditz of antiwar.com to give us a full update on what's going on in the Ukraine. I know I've been remiss in covering that. Have you been noticing that? Like, Adam, what the hell? Well, it's too much. I really wanted to do the show or do the subject justice, and so I'm calling in the big guns from antiwar.com to really get into everything that's happened over the last week, and it's definitely a subject worth really getting into. And then hopefully after that, and we don't know, Ed Fortune, who we missed earlier this week, is available now, and hopefully we'll be getting him on at about 1:30, maybe sometime between 1:30 and 2 o'clock. But in between all of these wonderful guests, we're going to be taking your Skype calls. So please get on Skype, Adam Kokesh, send me a chat, and let me know what you'd like to talk about. You can also just ask me questions directly if you don't want to call in, but you want to, you just want to ask me a question. Feel free to just chat it to me. And what else? We should tell people that they should donate. They should keep the lights on in here. That'd be nice. Keep the AC running. Whew, it does get very warm in here under the lights. And what's that? Oh, 420. Yeah, the reason we have this awesome lineup of guests is because it's Weed Week, and we've had an incredible lineup the rest of the week, thanks to our booker, Anthony Antonello, with all sorts of incredible weed-themed guests. So to celebrate this Sunday, 420, at 420, actually starting at 3:30, I'll just be hanging out on the north side of the Santa Monica Pier, the same place we had the Civil Disobedience Beach Party for a little 420 celebration. Of course, I will not be breaking any laws whatsoever or recommending that anybody else even suggest such an idea to anybody else. But we will be celebrating 420, and there will be a moment of appropriate reflection at 420. So, as always, send your love mail to Adam at AdamVersusTheMan.com, and we're very excited now to go to our first guest, who is actually being proactive and calling us. Rich, are you there? I believe we are coming to you now, or Rich is coming to us in the Keene Activism Center, the CAC in Keene. Someone's there. I saw a peace sign. Does that mean we have Rich Paul stand 2 minutes? All right. Well, we've got a connection at least with Rich Paul, and that's halfway there. So, we have a job offer out. We're hiring a post producer. We've got some great applications already, but if you're interested in that, please send an application to Adam at AdamVersusTheMan.com. Hey, Rich, you're already live, man. Hold on, I'm not getting any audio from you. You have is your mic just off in Skype? No. Can you hear me? I'm still not getting any audio from Rich here. I'm sure they'll figure that out. They're at the Keene Activism Center. I actually spoke to Ian Freeman because Rich is still figuring out some of his communications logistics, but we'll see as soon as they can get the audio figured out there. If you have a microphone hooked up, it's either Skype settings or it's turned off in the actual call with the microphone button. Anyway, Rich Paul is a pro-marijuana activist who is facing 81 years in prison for selling marijuana. He had refused plea bargain deals, including one that would have let him walk away with no jail time because he wanted to stand up for his principles, and gave an incredible go at jury nullification in his case. But we're going to get the full story from him right here. But it looks like we lost him. Let's see if we can get him back. Anyway, if you want to chat me, get in the queue. Skype, Adam Kokesh. And let's just see who's hanging out here. Why does it keep going down there? All right, Chris. All right, we'd love to talk to you on the show. Should we, let's see if anybody's just got questions. Clint. Oh, hey, it's Aaron. Just letting you know I'll be available again today. Oh, excellent. Yeah, we're going to go back to Clint. Actually, let's do this. Let's see if Clint's ready, since he messaged me just now, or just a little while ago. We'll squeeze him in while Rich is getting his audio figured out. Now, Clint, or I guess the account is Clint. The brother is Aaron. And these are the gentlemen that did a live police confrontation on the air with us last week. That was really, or that was Monday. That was Monday this week. Wow, what a packed week we've had. Speaking of which, if you haven't checked out the Jesse Ventura interview from Wednesday, that's up on YouTube, and that's really getting around and ruffling some feathers. I think you'll enjoy it. All right. We're getting Rich back on here. Hey, Rich.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you now. Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, Rich Paul is an incredible marijuana activist, pro-marijuana activist, and in Keene, New Hampshire, organized a regular series of protests in downtown Keene that I was fortunate enough to be a part of people avoiding arrest but openly smoking marijuana, passing joints very carefully, and we're going to hear from him about that. But more importantly, his recent legal episode where he was facing 81 years in prison after getting set up, and we had the wonderful experience of getting to write to each other from jail to jail. You got my letter while you were still in, right, Mr. Paul?
I sure did.
Well, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, why don't you first start with, introducing yourself as the character Rich Paul, incredible marijuana activist in Keene, New Hampshire, and what the scene is there with civil disobedience and everything else going on in Keene. And you're coming to us from the Keene Activism Center, correct?
Yeah, that was one of our Marine Band radios, which always creeped me out because they sound like cops.
Yeah, really. Why you got to do that? A house full of libertarian activists to have like police-style radios for anything? That's nuts. I can see you're still shaking, man. It's like you've got police state. You've got police state PTSD. I take it.
A little bit.
So please tell us about your activism in Keene first.
Okay, well, I moved to Keene, and my first experience in New Hampshire with marijuana activism was seeing a newspaper report of Andrew Carroll's activism, where he was arrested for being in possession of a bud of marijuana on the town square, not even smoking it, just holding it in his hand. And I looked at the newspaper and I said, that was a stupid thing to do. That's not going to change anybody's mind. Well, 9 months later, I had modified my position so much that I decided to start a rally on the town square where we went out every day at 4:20 in the afternoon and openly smoked weed. Sometimes avoiding arrest, sometimes not. I was arrested 3 times, and 2 other people were arrested once each.
Hold on, I want to go back. Who was the gentleman that first got arrested?
The first one was Andrew Carroll. He was one of the very early Free Staters.
Yeah, Andrew Carroll. I saw that video, and it was like before HD cameras were cheap, because I remember it's like 4:3 footage, and he's very polite. He's very calm. He's just standing there, and he calls them in advance, and he tells them what he's going to do, and he asks to be arrested, and he's pretty clear. He doesn't smoke. Right? He was like, I'm doing this as an act of civil disobedience because the drug war is a load of crap, and I'm not going to smoke this. I'm just going to hold it in my hand. I'm not a smoker. I don't enjoy marijuana at all, but this is where I'm taking my stand. Is that right?
That's correct.
So what was it that, I want to hone in on this, what was it that changed in your attitude towards that, or what was the value that you ended up seeing from that?
Well, there were a couple of things. One was, during that same period of time, I actually started smoking weed again. I hadn't done that in 22 years, and I had been severely depressed since the death of my girlfriend from cancer about 9 years before I moved up here.
Well, hey, that's enough of the value right there as a public service announcement. Hey, by the way, consider smoking weed again, right?
Yeah, and it really helped with the depression, and so I wanted to do some activism in Keene. I had changed my position on civil disobedience. I decided that it could be a good tactic if we did it properly. And what I did is, instead of calling the police in advance, I didn't even tell any other Free Staters that I was going to be out there on the square. I just started going out every day and telling other local stoners and saying, hey, if you want to come out and smoke, come out at 4:20. And by the time anybody noticed we were there, we'd been out there for almost a month, and we had a group of 30 people all standing in a circle passing joints.
Yep.
And the cops never did notice us. A journalist from Manchester who was covering, ironically, an argument about legalization of pot in the Keene City Council happened to see us out there and came out and said, okay, what are all you guys doing in the park? And so we told her, and she said, well, this is going to be on the front page of the Manchester Union Leader tomorrow morning. And we said, oh, my God.
Well,
so
I guess
at that point, no, it's on. Cops are going to be there.
Shit's about to get real.
Yeah, and we ended up that afternoon with 150 people, nearly probably
Woo!
two-thirds of them locals, and many of them not libertarian at all, just wanting to legalize weed. And we were all out there, and the cops came out, and they didn't know whether to shit or go blind. They had absolutely no idea what to do because there's 28 cops in this town. I've got 100, and I'm out smoking weed with 150 of my closest friends, and they're saying this is going to be a difficult arrest to make. So the first day they didn't arrest me, and we made the front page in 2 more cities. The second day, they came out again. That day, they started telling people, "Oh, they're not really smoking weed; they're just smoking tobacco and saying it's weed." So
nothing to see here. Move along.
But the cops were out there. I went out and I saw some actually photographers sitting on a bench taking pictures of the proceedings. And I said, I walked up to them. I said, you guys have been to journalism school. You know what weed smells like. And they're like, yeah.
So you said, went to college in America, right? Okay, you know what weed smells like. Got it.
Yeah.
You live in America. You know what weed smells like.
But so anyway, I said, is it okay if I blow some of this smoke at you? And so that you can confirm to your colleagues that we really are smoking weed out here. And they did that. And I did that. And then a cop started walking by. So I kind of turned my head and blew some smoke in his face. And at that point, he arrested me because really it was impossible to deny at that point that we were breaking the law. And they knew it was going to come out. So they had to arrest me, and 100 people marched down to the police station. And so I'm in there getting booked for this little misdemeanor 12 days I ended up doing for it. And there's 100 people outside the Keene Police Department, and me and the cop can hear them outside chanting, "Free Rich Paul! Free Rich Paul!" And the cop's just looking at me all sheepish and confused, and I've just got this shit-eating grin. I'm just laugh, pacing around, and I remember pacing around in the holding cell and going, "Yes, that plan went perfectly." How few people had probably paced that cell and had that precise thought, because nearly always the plan has gone awry by the time you arrive there. So
I'm like, whoa, you went to jail for weed? You did 12 days. Did you have some kind of priors?
No, I didn't have any priors. They fined me $420, ironically enough, $350.
Okay.
And they said, "You must pay this, and I will we will put you in jail." And I said, "Well, I won't pay this. This isn't something where you benefit."
Okay. So 12 days.
Food. So.
Okay, so 12 days was for the refusal to pay a $420 fine for smoking pot. Okay. All right, so you do 12 days. Now, I want to ask you just to step back for a second as an activist and give people a little bit of a peek behind the scenes in terms of the thinking that goes on here, because you knew this was a risk. What was the risk that you thought you were facing? What research did you do? And how were you prepared to say, okay, if I got to go away for 12 days, I can handle that?
Okay, there's several questions there. First off, the research I did was just looking at what happened to Andrew Carroll and the fact that he got a $420 fine, and he also refused to pay it and went to jail. So I pretty much knew what they were going to do going into it, and I decided before I was arrested, first off, I decided that I was going to be the first person arrested there because it was very important to me what was going to happen after the arrest, and I was the only person that I knew for sure would do what I wanted done. So I was intentionally getting arrested. I knew I was going to do 12 days, probably no more and no less. So I was just resigned to, okay, I'm going to be in jail for a couple of weeks. It's happened before. I was in jail as a teenager in Detroit, and believe me, New Hampshire jails are a lot more fun than the ones in Detroit.
They can afford food in New Hampshire.
So anyway, and the thing that I wanted done is what I did, which is they arrested me. They took me down to the police station. They booked me. I was amazed that there were 100 people outside, but I loved it. And it was exactly what I was hoping for. And when I got out, me and those 100 people marched back to the square, and I lit up another joint. And, the police were called to tell them that I was there and smoking weed again, and they couldn't be troubled. So, so that was kind of what I was hoping would happen. I wasn't really, I was willing to make it probably would have been about 30 days if they'd gotten me again that day. But, it would have been okay, but I was just as happy not to get arrested again. And eventually we got to the point where we would be out on the square at 11 o'clock at night, openly drinking beers and toasting the cops as they drove by, and they didn't stop, and they didn't talk to us. The Keene Town Square for 2 years, or probably closer to 4 years, maybe 3 years, was the first demilitarized zone in New Hampshire in the war on drugs.
Damn.
They realized that they could not control us, and so they just let us slide. My favorite incident of that was the last day that they dispatched police to us. We intercepted over the scanner. The dispatcher called the cop, and he said, go down to the square. And at that point, the rallies were loud and angry and boisterous. And cops had been there for several days. And he said, it is our presence on the square that is causing the problem. And he said, I'm not going to go. And he didn't go. And no cops showed up that day, and no cops showed up ever again.
Okay, now
thinking what happened is that the cops went to the union and said, look, either you're going to let us arrest these people, or we're going to stay away from the square, but we're not going to go out there and be humiliated every day. That's my guess as to what happened behind the scene.
Okay, that's perfect. No, and you've done an incredible job doing exactly what I would hope you would do and setting yourself up for people to understand why you were then targeted after all of this. This is who you are as the guy in New Hampshire. Now, before we get to that, though, I want to get a little timeline context for this, because when I first got there, and got to be a part of the 420 celebration in Keene downtown, it was late 2011. I mean, we're talking, a few years ago. It was right after my TV show got canceled and I was going independent, and I got to do fun stuff like that again. And I came up there, and there were cops there, and there were, a couple dozen people. There's video of this on my YouTube channel, and many others. And if there are anybody that you want to share with our audience, we'll make sure to include links of whatever, whatever the great YouTube channels coming out of Keene are that have the good footage from this. But there were a couple dozen people, and there were a few cops that came and did this sort of mild petty harassment where they're just standing around looking over people's shoulders, being really creepy and weird while people are passing around cigarettes and joints to confuse them. And they're kind of being dicks about it, but they're backing off, and they don't actually end up arresting people, even though they know that marijuana is being smoked right there. That was I think November 2011. How long had this been going on? How much time had transpired from you getting out of jail to then?
Well, my first arrest, I moved to Keene September 1st of 2009. My first arrest was September 26th. A year later, I was finally done with the trial. By the time I was done with all the trials, I was charged with 11 misdemeanors and 5 felonies in Massachusetts. So I had a pretty complex.
Hold on, but that's the 81 years you're talking about there, right?
No, this was a previous felony arrest where finally I pleaded down because I was outside New Hampshire, and I consider the other 49 states to be lost causes, each and every one. In Massachusetts, I didn't bother not to take the plea. I was charged with 5 felonies. I held out until they offered me a misdemeanor, and then I said, yes, I'll go ahead and do that. And the other thing there is the guy that I was with had been on parole, and he was sitting in county jail in Massachusetts for quite a while. And part of the plea bargain was we get him back. So that started the ball rolling for him to get out as well. So there I took the plea and just ended up with a misdemeanor.
Okay, so we're talking about a little of somewhere between 1 and 2 years from you getting in New Hampshire, getting this activism started, going through all this legal stuff until you create this demilitarized zone. And I come in the middle of it, and it's just a regular routine thing at that point. And you're this guy that is holding this down, that is getting people to come out. I got to film Derek J's arrest for civil disobedience when I was up in Keene for that trip, and you were there for that. We have great video from that as well. But you were the public enemy number one in this tiny town in New Hampshire with a police force of 28 officers. And I think that sets up exactly how the perfect lead into for you to tell the story of how you ended up facing 81 years. So with that understanding that you're that guy, how does this story start where you get set up with all of these charges?
Well, basically the way the exchange went down is there was a lot of interest on this is my reconstruction, what I believed happened. I can't document it except by some of the testimony at my trial.
Sure.
But all of the testimony with my trial is consistent with this theory that that Phil Cristiano of the Joint Terrorism Task Force wanted to find out what was going on inside the Keene Activist Center. And I think that was especially true because at the time Chris Cantwell was here, and Cantwell puts out some of the and I don't fault him or blame him for this. I've been on his show and told him that and had this conversation with him. But he puts out the kind of rhetoric that gets law enforcement really interested in people. And I think that's a lot of the reason they wanted inside the KAC.
Well, hold on. I just want to, as long as you bring it up, I would like to comment on this because I'm with you in your attitude towards Chris, but I'd like to suggest a different way of looking at it because Chris Cantwell is a comedian. He's an angry, drunk Liberty comedian, and he makes no, illusions about that whatsoever. And he talks about difficult subjects, and he makes humor that's offensive to some people, and he talks about very, controversial things. And he talks a lot about, and I think what you're specifically referring to is when is violence righteous or justified, hypothetically, in response to an aggression from a state aggressor or a state enforcer. And you said the words that you use that I just want to.
What he gives when he speaks is a very concise, very accurate picture of what the NAP allows. Absolutely, you're allowed to defend yourself against anybody who aggresses against you, including people wearing badges.
And he goes right to that line, which is perfect, which is a very valuable service for the cause.
I agree. So as I say, I'm not condemning Caswell.
Right.
I'm not condemning him in any way. And as a matter of fact, I just wrote a Facebook post or reposted a Facebook post yesterday protesting his exclusion from Porkfest because I think he should be there.
Absolutely.
But anyway, Cantwell was here, and that does obviously there is some interest in the kinds of things that he says, and I think that's part of the reason the feds wanted to see what was going on in here, to see if we were making soap in the background.
No. Hold on a second. I think the way that just if I may be very precise with the language here, and I know you'll appreciate this. The police aren't genuinely interested in what's going on in the Keene Activism Center. They really could not care less because they know it is not a threat to their personal security. So the language that you use.
The FBI is less sure. And
no.
FBI
Even hold on. I just want to propose a different perspective that I think represents a better understanding of government, which is that language like that gives law enforcement an excuse to target someone to justify their budgets, to make busy work. And they'll find any excuse. It's just that Cantwell uses language that gives them lots of excuses. They're not genuinely interested. They don't care. They just go after an easy target that they can, that they can pass off and report to their seniors who can justify it to the voting public through the distorted chain of accountability of government and say, well, we need to spend these trillions of dollars on the security state because there are even homegrown domestic terrorists who we've intercepted through the NSA, wiretapping. They're talking about using violence against government, when the truth is we're talking about asserting our rights and using violence in self-defense as an absolute last resort, and they twist that. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page with that understanding, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good interpretation. So anyway, for whatever reasons, they wanted to look inside the Keene Activist Center.
Yeah,
and so Phil Cristiano, Special Agent Phil Cristiano, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, called up the head of the Drug Task Force in Keene and said, "We need some dirt on a free stater. Can you get me some? Can you get a free stater to commit a felony for you?" And they asked around to all their snitches, and they found somebody who knew me and had done business with me. Actually, he had been a supplier of mine. And he called me up and asked me for a £1/4, and I went ahead and made sales to him. So that's kind of how the targeting took place, as far as I can tell. Now, Christiana claimed during my trial that the Drug Task Force of Keene had called him, but each and every member of the Drug Task Force denied having called him, and the head of the Drug Task Force directly contradicted him and said, I can absolutely guarantee you that nobody from my office made the first contact with Phil Christiana, which leaves only one possibility in my mind, which is that Phil Christiana called that particular individual to initiate to initiate contact, because that's the only way he could have known for sure. So anyway, they wanted to see inside the Keene Activist Center, and my first thought was, okay, I'm going to go along with this. I'm going to let them strap me up with a wire, and then I'm going to walk into the KAC, lift up my shirt, and say, hey guys, you're never going to believe what happened to me today. But the problem was he wanted to ask me questions before this happened, and the first question he asked me was, what's your address? And the answer I would have had to give him would have been the Keene Activist Center, and I didn't know if that would have justified a search warrant. So at that point, I said, no, on the other hand, I need to talk to my lawyer right now. And they said, well, you'll get your lawyer on Monday when you're arraigned, and they sent me to a holding cell and changed me into jail clothes. And then, which they don't usually do at the police department, but they wanted to make an impression on me, I think. And they change you at the jail. And then they called me back into the interrogation room, and they said, have you changed your mind? And I said, no. They said, well, we're going to put you in jail for 81 years if you don't snitch. And I said, well, okay, let's do that.
Do the clothes make the man and turn you into a snitch? Do the clothes make the man so much that they can just turn you into a snitch by dressing you differently?
Well, apparently not, and I think they just wanted to scare me. So then they did something that really did scare me, which is say, okay, well, we're just going to change you back out and cut you loose, and you can go talk to the public defender tomorrow. And I'm like, what did you say? And they didn't let me call for a ride, and they walked, which normally they insist you have a ride, but they wouldn't let me call for a ride. They said they didn't want anybody to know where I was. And I said, well, you don't seem to understand. 800 people knew where I was before I got to the parking lot, because we had a Porcupine 411 system, and the girl who was driving me called it. So they just had me walk out the front door and start walking down the street. And I'm literally walking out this front door thinking, these assholes are going to shoot me in the back, because this isn't how you get released when they decide not to charge you. And they gave me a little piece of paper saying I'd been charged with a misdemeanor, which wasn't true. So that's kind of the experience. So I refused to do that. I said, no, I'm going to go to trial. I got a public defender. I told her that I was going to use a jury nullification defense and asked her if she was okay with that. She said she was. And I went to trial. I was offered a plea deal with 0 time and without snitching the day before trial. And I turned it down. I said, no, I'm going to take my chances with the jury.
For 81 years. For 81 years.
Yeah. Actually, according to my attorney, they had miscalculated, and actually, if I maxed out and did it all end to end, it would be 100 years.
Yeah, but hold on a second. Now, that's always a hypothetical. Now, realistically, I don't know, and I've been in this situation before, so you're not going to get one over on me here. But I understand that that's the hypothetical. But realistically, sentencing guidelines and there's some restriction on precedents. What did you realistically think you were facing? Worst case scenario there.
I thought I was going to do 2 to 5.
Okay, now that's so, and I don't mean to demean that at all, but to just so people know the reality of what it is that you face as an activist. Because if it was, 81 years, or I'm going to take a chance with a jury, I'd be like, you're a fucking moron. But to say, that's life.
I didn't expect the whole thing.
Yeah. Okay. So, but 2 to 5, and that's kind of like what I've been facing, right? And for me, it was like I could have hypothetically, it would have stacked up with all of the threatened charges to something like 30, 35 years. And realistically, it was somewhere in the realm of 3 to 5 as a realistic worst case scenario. And that's a reasonable risk. And you're saying, I am going to put that much of my life on the line for this cause to make this statement. And that's still an incredibly ballsy thing to do.
Well, thanks. So basically, the other factor that was involved here is we knew that the judge was going to give the jury an instruction which was inconsistent with jury nullification in New Hampshire.
Yep.
And jury nullification is black letter law in New Hampshire, and that's because we've elected free staters to the legislature who have made it law. So it explicitly says in New Hampshire RSAs that jury nullification is an acceptable defense. And we knew that the judge was going to give an instruction which said basically that jury nullification was not an acceptable defense. And so there was also the intent to appeal, and there has been an appeal filed on that issue. We decided to file the appeal only on that one narrow issue, so they couldn't avoid that issue by deciding it on something else that we argued. And that is before the New Hampshire Supreme Court now. And although I've already done the time, if we win that case and jury nullification becomes much more common in New Hampshire, there's going to come a time when they can't charge marijuana defendants anymore because they all say, hey, I'm going to roll the dice and go to trial and see if I can get nullification. And at that point, pot isn't really illegal in New Hampshire anymore.
Exactly. And that's why they have to resist it. But please, now we just have a few minutes left. Tell us, how did the trial play out? How did it go procedurally? How did you feel about the outcome? And then, what is your current legal status?
Let's see. Well, the trial went badly from my point of view. I made the mistake of not testifying. And it was literally my lawyer called in her lawyer to talk me out of testifying because she couldn't do it. And finally, the morning I was supposed to testify, I agreed not to do it. And I've been kicking myself ever since. And I think that one of the lessons from my trial is if you're going to ask for jury nullification, you need to get up on the stand yourself and ask for it.
Or defend yourself and speak directly to the jury at least.
Exactly. And that's what I should have done and did not do. So I was very disappointed in that.
Well, let me point something out, if I may, from my similar background as an activist, is with some relevant experience here. And I want to say this to all the aspiring activists in the audience who are inspired by stories like yours, in that you will, I like to quote Donald Rumsfeld, my favorite statist. You go to war with the army you have, not the army you wish you had. And you will never, that like really what you are doing, even if you consider it performance art as your activism, when you're facing down the state, when you're doing something as complex as facing charges from the government, you are never going to be able to look back on an action from start to finish and say, yeah, I nailed it. I did everything perfectly. It's impossible. It's not going to happen. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to, and even in the victors in the biggest wars and the greatest battles and the greatest generals in America or in human history have made incredible tactical mistakes that have cost countless lives, and yet you keep going, you keep marching, you fight on, and I just want to I hope that helps to contextualize what you just said.
Oh, yeah, it does, and you're absolutely right. I mean, Law and Order makes everything neat and pretty because they get to write both sides of the dialogue.
There's one other lesson. There's one other lesson I want to share specifically from my Marine Corps experience, and I forget who said it, but it's kind of like an old adage: no battle plan ever survives enemy contact. And it's like it's this.
That actually exists in Freehold by Michael Z. Williamson, and I think it also exists in Robert Heinlein's corpus.
Okay, it's probably from Heinlein or something like that. But no, and this is true about activism as well. You have and for me, I go with my recent legal escapades in DC, you think, oh, you're going to get a fair trial and everything's going to be neat and smooth and orderly. And no, I guarantee you that is not going to happen. Whatever plan you have for a protest, if something doesn't go wrong, you're not being ambitious enough. You can go stay on a street corner and have everything go according to plan. But if you're really throwing down, if something doesn't go according to, if everything goes according to plan, you're not being ambitious enough. And you can, when it's, no battle plan survives enemy contact, the government has a way of screwing up your plans. And thanks to the NSA, they know exactly what they are now. So they're going to, and you have to anticipate that. And they're always going to make things more difficult and more messy. And you're going to think, well, it's going to be an easy decision. Oh, I'm going to roll the dice. Is it going to be 2 to 5 years or jury nullification? And it's like, no, it's never that clear. It's never that cut and dry.
That's true. That's true. It's never as simple as you think it is.
So how did this end up for you? What's your current legal status?
Well, I did a county year in jail, which broke down to actually 8 months. Actually, today is April 18th, so this is the 1-year anniversary of the day I went to jail. And I've been out for 4 months. My legal status is on probation. In theory, they can drug test me, but they haven't been doing that.
Well, you could probably make the case. This is leftover from before I got arrested, right?
Huh?
You could probably make the case to them. This is all backed up. If you test positive, it's like, from the 3 years of prior activism, you're still getting clean from that.
Yeah, it's true. So I was only in jail for a year. But
how long would it take to detox Rich Paul?
I don't know. See, I really haven't been smoking that long. I don't know. The depression kicked in about 2 weeks after, or 3 weeks after I hit the jail. So I guess that was when I was.
Yeah. No, thank you for countering my bad humor with a realistic estimate there, because it is important to point out that it does have some interesting effects, and you notice after something like that, and I understand when you're just out of your comfort zone, no matter what it is, jail is not comfortable.
Oh, it's true. It's true. So, what did you end up getting on your case? I heard about this when I was in jail, but I never really got the details of the plea agreement or anything like that.
Well, I wasn't as lucky as you to get a plea that had a time agreement, so I had to take my chances and roll the dice with the judge, and I got very lucky, and I think it was partly because of the public support and everything else, and I definitely understand how that was a very important dynamic in your case as well. And when you first went to jail, we supported you with Adam versus the Man, and changed our profile picture on Facebook to free Rich Paul, and did everything we could to raise awareness for your story. And because people were doing that for me, I think it had an effect, and I ended up getting time served, which was 4 months, because I was denied bail. And every story is totally unique, and it almost gets boring to get into all of the little legal intricacies of, well, this happened and this happened and they did this. Basically, I was denied bail, took a plea, got time served. I was very, very lucky that it came out that way, but I still have charges pending in Virginia. I'm hoping to get time served for that, but that's what it's looking like. So I'm on probation, but I'm in California and I'm loving it, and I'm really excited to be able to talk to someone like you in this context and bring your story to our audience as well.
Well, it's great to talk to you too. Are you making it to PorkFest this year?
Oh no, I'm going to be chained to my desk here working on the book, but trust me, it'll be worth it. You will love it. Rich, thanks so much for joining us.
Hope you'll come out and party with us in 2 years then.
Oh, don't worry. There will be plenty of time to party with Free Staters playing for Adam versus the Man. And for those of you that don't know, you want to do a quick plug for the Shire?
Yeah, if you want to be free, if you want to experience liberty in your lifetime, check out freestateproject.org. We're attempting to move 20,000 libertarian activists into New Hampshire to shrink government down to its lowest possible level. And we're winning, and only 1,000 of us have moved yet. We've got 15,000 signed up. So if you want to be free, this is the place to be.
Awesome. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Rich Paul from the Keene Activism Center in Keene, New Hampshire. And we go now to our next guest. Let's see, do we have him in context? Yes, Danny Panzella, does potcurecancer.com. Ladies and gentlemen, Danny Panzella of TrueSquad.tv and does potcurecancer.com is a seasoned veteran activist as well. Seems like we're getting a lot on the show this today, and it's great for Weed Week to be able to bring you people that are actually out in the streets doing stuff on these issues. But he got to start with the original We Are Change New York City, later founded True Squad TV, where he continued researching and reporting on subjects that others just aren't talking about. Does an incredible job there. He's also the founder of Peaceful Streets New York City and the producer of Does Pot Cure Cancer? Danny, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Hey, can we get some video for you?
Yeah, hold on.
Awesome. We gotta get your shiny, beautiful face on here so people know exactly what they can expect out of you. All right, Danny,
Should be coming up.
Are you driving right now?
I am driving, but I'm about to pull over in a minute.
No, just keep driving. We'll make it another first for Adam versus the man. And we did a live confrontation with the police. So if you get pulled over, at least it'll be live broadcast to the world. So just please.
Well, I was just being followed by the Popo a few minutes ago. They turned off, thankfully.
Well, they knew that you were going to be on the show, obviously. Hey, watch out. Hey, we
do know that I am being clocked by the NYPD.
Well, tell us about that. How did you set yourself up to that point?
Oh, well, a few years ago when I posted that I was doing the protest at the Federal Reserve and the 40 cops showed up to respond to my protest.
You've been a New York City person of interest?
I broke the story that the NYPD had started the social networking task force to monitor social networking for protest and criminal activity.
So you're that guy in New York?
I'm that guy.
How many people are there though? I mean, there's obviously only one Danny Panzella, but in New York City, you have an army of cops. They're looking for targets. Are there other activists? Are you hiding someone in the back seat? Are you smuggling people into the city too? Ladies and gentlemen, live on Adam versus the Man, Danny Panzella commits 3 felonies.
And plus, I'm driving with a device in my hand. That's a big no-no too. All right, I'm gonna pull over right now.
Hey, I see a group of school children in the background. Why don't you turn around and go run them over for us? We'll get that on camera.
Maybe I'll see if I could sell them some weed. That might be a better. I can help them cure their cancer before they get it.
Oh, how many activists of your your prominence are being targeted by NYPD at this level?
Oh, I'm sure that there's a lot. I know Occupy Wall Street was pretty hot with the NYPD in terms of having wanted posters inside precincts of some of the Occupy, and there's some crossover between Occupy, Cop Watch, Cop Block activists that are definitely we have seen that they had in some of the precincts wanted posters, and I know that a lot of times when I've been out with Luke Radowski doing confrontations. Many times we've heard NYPD intelligence detectives say, "Oh, that's Luke Radowski," and so he's got, he's pretty recognizable as well. So,
well, how long have you lived in New York City?
I've lived in New York City my whole life, so 37 years. Oh my God, I'm getting old.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Not that you're getting old, but that you've wasted.
I live in a state of hellhole. I know.
Yeah, this is I've been invited to speak several times in New York City to various libertarian groups, and I always feel like it's this little huddle of troops around a campfire in the middle of the forest, like deep behind enemy lines. It's always got that feel to it. I mean, why are you living in New York?
Well, my son is the primary reason why I'm still here, stuck in prison. But it's very frustrating, especially dealing with the NYPD on a regular basis. Any type of business that you want to open. The statism is just so oppressive here in a metropolis like New York City that I really feel it every single day. And it is very frustrating and a lot of times can get very depressing. That's why one of the reasons why I enjoy those, kind of campfire huddles at Liberty Fest or Pork Fest or all the different...
Anarchy in the NYC.
Anarchy in the NYC, all of the different events where we can kind of get together and have some anarchist voluntarist fellowship.
Well, what I really want to ask you about though is, I think you and I have a similar philosophical orientation, and I hope a positive worldview. And I don't know if you've heard my more recent perspective on this, but in terms of humanity moving on or moving forward and adopting the message of liberty, you're a positive outlook kind of libertarian who sees that we are moving forward, that more people are waking up to the nature of government, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so
I think the quicker government moves, the more they reveal themselves, and people start to see it for what it is.
Okay, well, so if this is happening, globally, right, and people, it's happening because of the internet, and people are more connected, and there's more communication. Nowhere are people more connected, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's some disconnect of urban living that I'm not getting, but it seems like in New York City, you're hyper connected. Everybody's sitting on each other's heads anyway. is there, you would think that in cities even more so than maybe in rural areas where, yes, I understand there's more cultural or psychological fertile soil for the message of freedom, but in cities you have a much more truly progressive, and I don't mean liberal, but progressive in the definition of the word, not the political sense, but progressive thinking and people having an intellectual scene. Is there like no intellectual scene in New York City anymore? Like, how is this dynamic not more prominent in a city like New York?
I think it's just cognitive dissonance. People, especially people that you would think would be more open to a nonviolent message that voluntarism offers, no, they want to enforce peace with violence. So it's just basic cognitive dissonance, and I think that they're under hardcore mind control, from the government, media, just pushing statism as the answer to everything. From the moment we, are born, we're just being propagandized, and I think that's really the problem.
So would you say that, like, as a feature of dense city living, that the ever-present hand of government just has a deeper psychological effect?
Yeah, well, I think that there are certain parts to statism that they call it full spectrum dominance, right? So Keynesianism is a statist economic policy that creates poverty. Poverty breeds crime. So now, as a response to the crime, they can bring in a police state to keep us safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that full spectrum dominance basically has people paralyzed with fear and or just really believing that that's the proper response to that, is to have an armed occupying force to keep us all safe, to scare people into not committing crimes. And, just all the things that we know are logical fallacies that aren't really true. And if you allow people to be free and allow people to prosper on their own, they will. And that, causes more of a peaceful way of life for everybody.
So do you think it's all like through the law enforcement mechanism? Is it all in, seeing a cop on the corner every day and the relationship to the police state? Or is it the media and the politicians and the air war here?
I think it's both. I think you need both.
If you're going to screw people really effectively, you need to do it from both ends. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are some people that are going to respond to the manipulation of the mind control of the media. And then there are other people that need a little bit of a harder stick. They need to get hit on the head a few times before they get the message to obey. So I think that, again, it's really just full spectrum dominance. And the police state, especially in New York City and, in DC and Chicago, the police state affects everything. So whether you're a cab driver, cab drivers who drive without a license are arrested. You're put in a cage for not having a special stamp on your license that says not only are you licensed to drive a car, but you're licensed to drive a taxi.
And the $1 million medallion that every company has to purchase to have a legitimate taxi in New York.
Ensuring that only the wealthiest of the wealthy can prosper in a taxi business. So, it affects everything through regulation. So it's not just a matter of that. Hot dog vendors get arrested all the time. If their cart isn't in the right spot, they're getting ticketed and arrested. If they're not on the right corner, or if you're selling watches on the street. So it affects everything. And really, it's just to protect the 1%, or whatever euphemism you want to use. It's the crony capitalists are really just the ones that are being protected. It's not that they're keeping us safe. And especially with the NYPD, we've seen through the case of Joel Ozito. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the NYPD argued in court it has no responsibility to protect the citizens of New York. Its responsibility is to protect the law, which equals the government.
Right. So there's obviously some inherent fear in this that is maybe unique to living in an urban environment, fear of street crime. And,
right.
Obviously that's a legitimate problem, that is the excuse for NYPD to exist. They take that authority because they're going to protect you from muggers. And by that, they mean show up and write a report afterwards. But
yeah, right.
if there's a legitimate fear in New York City of living in that environment of interpersonal violence and interpersonal crime, how does that measure up to in this psychological effect to say the threat of terrorism, and how much is 9/11 still being used to justify a lot of the expenditures that we've seen out of NYPD?
Well, in terms of funding, it's still being used a lot. They're implementing a lot of new technology. Basically, Homeland Security funds the NYPD now through grants and
they fund every law enforcement organization in the United States to some degree.
Sure. So, I mean, if you have a police force that's completely federalized, and then terrorism has to be the number one, that's what justifies federal involvement. How much of that is still on the psyche of the average New Yorker? I think it's probably waned some. Maybe not enough for them to speak up about the fact that there are, NYPD with machine guns in the subways. I mean, if you think practically, you have military background, you can't even use a machine gun in the subway. You'd be killing many innocents if you tried to use it. So really, it's the NYPD's own terrorism, and they admit they have a division that drives around New York City, and they admit the purpose is to scare terrorists. They have like 20 or 30 cars that just ride around in a caravan with their lights flashing, and it's just meant to be a show of force. So that's really all it is. It's intimidating the public into just complying with the police state. So most New Yorkers still accept the police state, whether they legitimately believe it's true or not. They don't care enough, or they don't think that, well, I'm not a criminal, so I don't have anything to worry about. They have that type of attitude, and it's pretty much only the really poor and the really brown that are suffering the most under this. 2 weeks ago, I witnessed there was a panhandler who I know. He's always in the same spot. He's in a wheelchair. He had his legs cut off in a car accident, and he was surrounded by 6 cops. So I stopped to videotape, and to him about a week later, and he said, yeah, the cops were apologetic. They said, we're sorry, but the mayor's office says we need to get all the panhandlers off the street, so we have to arrest you. And this is really, there's a war on the poor and a war on the brown. So if you're not poor and you're not brown, you're much more willing to let it go because the police are not in your neighborhood.
Very well said. Is there anything else you want to share about this wonderful window you've given us into the statism in New York City and your activism there?
Oh, well, I mean, it's never ending. And I've been trying for several years now with Peaceful Streets Project New York City to lobby politicians who claim to be liberal on civil liberties issues, like, for instance, the NYPD implementing body scanners on the streets. They're planning to just scan everybody as they're walking up and down the streets. And if they see a weapon, then engage. They claim that this will lower stop and frisk. But I think that this just will give them justification to stop and frisk more people. Now, if you have a pen in your pocket, they're going to say, well, that looked like a gun on the scanner, so now I have the right to stop you.
But it's not stop and frisk anymore. It's scan and frisk. That sounds wonderful, doesn't it? All right. Danny, thank you so much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Danny Panzella, TruthSquad.tv, and DoesPotCureCancer.com. All right. We have one more guest, and then we got a lot of chats lined up here, but we have one more guest that we want to bring on here before we go open up the lines. We're going to see if we can get Jason Ditz on here. This is Jason Ditz from antiwar.com to give us an update on what is going on in the Ukraine. Let's see, he should be standing by.
Hello?
Yes, Jason, welcome to the show. Can we get some video for you?
Let me see.
I mean, I'm pretty sure you're not a cat. Just saying. All right, excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Ditz of antiwar.com joins us now to give us an update of this past week of interesting events that have transpired in Ukraine with Russia and the various involvements of other European countries and the United States as well. Now, Jason, I've been following this story not as closely as I wanted to this week because it seems like there's a whole lot of little pieces of information coming out, kind of a muddled narrative. But I think everybody's familiar with the background of the overthrow or the revolution, however you want to describe it. But the upheaval in Ukraine that led to a new government, now an interim government. We know that there were, as always in events like this, a lot of larger forces at play behind the scenes. And then we see Crimea being annexed, however you want to describe that, by Russia and having a referendum. But now it seems like there's a whole other dynamic developing in eastern Ukraine, with Russia again possibly trying to expand its power. Although I guess we can say certainly that there's something going on there. So please, is that a correct, at least setup for what has transpired recently? Did I get everything correct there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly Russia is involved in what's going on in the eastern Ukraine. Exactly how involved is a matter of some dispute. The U.S. and some other Western nations have claimed that basically they've organized and run these protests entirely out of Moscow, which I don't think there's good evidence for that. And at the same time, Ukraine's interim government has been threatening military action against the east, launching some limited military offensives against some of the border towns. And it's really become quite a mess because Ukraine's military doesn't seem to be up to the task of even taking on protesters. And always looming over this is Russia saying that they reserve the right to defend those protesters.
Well, we know it doesn't take a whole lot to stir unrest, and from even just our experience with activism in the United States, it really doesn't take a whole lot of people showing up to organize to incite something when there is a public sentiment. But you're saying that there is whatever Russia might, or the Russian government might be stoking in terms of public sentiment in Ukraine has a legitimate grassroots backing. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. The thing is, if you look at Ukraine's voting tendencies when they've had elections, the country is split in several very strong ways politically. This part of the country along the Russian border was very strongly in favor of the Yanukovych government, which got ousted by protesters in Kiev and replaced by this pro-Western interim government. And they're not at all keen on this new government, and the new government honestly isn't all that keen on them. There have been some very hostile comments from some of the far right in the new government saying that you can't trust the people of eastern Ukraine. There are too many ethnic Russians among them. They're disloyal just on the face of it, and calling for this military action to stop any protests.
Well, give us the narrative then of this last week, if you would please, or whatever has transpired since the referendum in Crimea that's led us to this current conflict.
Well, Crimea held its referendum. It was annexed into Russia. It's part of the Russian Federation now. And Western rhetoric aside, I don't think anybody realistically expects that to change. Now, the protests in eastern Ukraine erupted a little while later, after the Crimea situation was more or less resolved. What's happening in eastern Ukraine is a group of protesters, all with somewhat different views. Some of them want to follow Crimea into joining the Russian Federation. Some of them just want considerably more autonomy in their region while remaining part of the Ukraine. And all of them seem to be united in the idea that this current government, which wasn't elected and would have little to no political support in their part of the country, shouldn't be able to run their region of the country. And a big aspect of this is Russian language. Of course, Ukrainian is its own language, and it's the official language nationwide. But a lot of the people in eastern Ukraine speak Russian. They don't speak Ukrainian. And they're pushing to make sure that their language remains a legal language to use for official business.
So, what is the role of the military now in eastern Ukraine, and how is that relevant to how this plays out?
Well, as the protests got bigger, they basically have taken over 2 provinces along the border with Russia. For a while, they had part of a 3rd province, but the Interior Ministry sent troops in and retook those cities, Kharkiv and the surrounding area.
So Russian troops took 3.
Ukrainian troops have retaken one of those. The ethnic Russian protesters in eastern Ukraine have taken 2 provinces and are basically holding them.
With the support of Russian troops, correct?
No, there aren't any confirmations of any Russian troops on the ground. There are some militias on the ground that seem to be locally organized, certainly backed by Russia.
Right, and it would be a shocking surprise if there were not numerous Russian government-funded personnel as part of those militias working seemingly independently. But you're saying there's still it is still based on some genuine grassroots support. But there, of course, the Russian government is having some hand in this, and you know that of course behind the scenes it's very easy for them to send in even a few hundred military operatives undercover, as we saw happening in Crimea, correct?
Oh, sure. But in Crimea, you also had thousands of Russian troops that were already there as part of the naval base.
Right.
And you don't see anything like that in eastern Ukraine. Exactly how much Russian involvement there is in these militias is still disputed. The U.S. would say that it's pretty much entirely a Russian-run thing. The protesters would say Russia's certainly supporting them.
But it's us.
Right.
So, how do you think that this is going to play out then?
Well, I think it remains to be seen. Ukraine's military has attacked a couple of cities inside the Donetsk province, which is one of these 2 eastern Ukrainian provinces that are basically out of their control. They took one of the cities over without too much fighting, but they really stalled when they tried to attack the second city. Kramatorsk fell pretty much instantly. There was a little fighting around the airport there. When they moved on to Slavyansk, which is a bigger protest hub, the troops were met with a lot of the militias were there, but it was mostly the peaceful protesters blocking the roads, calling on the troops to leave, and a lot of the troops did just lay down their arms and refuse to follow orders to attack the city.
Now that's really incredible, and I want to point something out here that has really surprised me about the story as a whole, is how small scale the violence has been, if there's been any. Because when you hear about this narrative, if it was, hey, there's an upheaval and a new government in Kiev, and then Russia annexes Crimea, and now you have 3 provinces in revolt, and you have the military having to go in and take control. If you were telling this story, say, happening maybe 100 years ago, you'd be like, oh, okay, so a few thousand people are dying every day, in order for this, change of powers to take place. If anything, it is really a beautiful measure of how far humanity has come, that this much change and upheaval can happen with such, even at this high stakes level, with so little violence and such a small death count. And I think it's really a measure of the expectation for nonviolence and autonomy being respected, that people are going, no, we're not just going to start shooting each other over this. How do you feel that plays into the narrative, or am I off base with any of that? Is there violence here that I'm not picking up on?
No, I think you're right. Certainly there's some violence going on. When you have troops rolling into cities, there's inevitably going to be some violence, people throwing beer bottles at them, things like that, troops shooting back at them. But we've seen, yesterday we saw 3 deaths in the South.
Right.
When protesters marched on a National Guard base. But Mostly, I mean, those are the only confirmed deaths. There were some reports of some deaths in Kramatorsk that were never really confirmed. There have been a handful of injuries, but like you say, when you see this sort of military crackdown, especially in Eastern Europe, you would expect death tolls in the thousands, and we're not seeing anything like that.
Right. I mean, you can even compare it to what's happening just a little way south in Syria, where you've had dozens of people dying every day in violent conflict for the last several years. And by comparison, this looks like a very civilized process of resolving this dispute. And I hope that this would be kind of the new expectation. And I want to say, go team people. We're figuring this out, relatively peacefully. Like, hey, we're all at each other's throats, and yeah, it's high stakes, and yeah, we're talking about government and sovereignty and things like that. But it's not, people aren't jumping to, because you can't convince the trigger pullers to do that. And the waves of military members in different forms, or militia members standing down at various points in this, has been so encouraging, that they're saying, what, it's just for one government or another, it's just not worth killing people over.
Well, right. And certainly I wouldn't want to say that what's happening in Syria can't happen in Ukraine, because I think there's always a risk that this spirals out of control. It would, if you had a few more significant massacres by Ukrainian troops, I think you would start seeing more violent revolt in the region and more violent crackdowns. But so far, it doesn't seem like anyone's got an appetite for that. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what we've seen out of Ukraine's interim government is just demands and ultimatums that I don't think they realistically expect most of them to be met, but they aren't followed on by immediate military offensives.
Well, it's, as a libertarian, I'm so hopeful anytime, mass violence is avoided in favor of relatively peaceful dispute resolution, but also very encouraged in the broader scale, seeing this as part of a sort of global secessionist movement. And I know that's really not fully capturing it, but like you see in Catalonia, in different parts in South America, in the Arab Spring, the general, I mean, even in the United States, California proposed to be broken up into 6 pieces, various, the new state in Colorado and surrounding counties. The conversation has changed, and people are talking about sovereignty and autonomy in a whole different way, and that's so exciting to see. But my hope here, and I suppose I'll say my prediction, is that the expectation for Eastern Ukraine is going to be the same as Crimea, and they're going to say, let's have a referendum. I just hope that one of the options on the ballot is complete autonomy. How do you think this is going to play out?
Well, that would be great if that turns out to be an option, and Ukrainian officials have presented that as a possibility, although they've somewhat hedged on exactly how that would take place. We've seen, you certainly mentioned a lot of different places where we're seeing secessionist movements, but don't forget Italy, which is seeing at least 3 distinct secessionist movements right now, and amounting to a good chunk of the country. That's a country that we could well see split into several pieces, and I think the Crimean standard that people do have a right to vote for secession if they want to is potentially a very powerful and transformative thing.
Absolutely. Well, in Crimea, it was like, okay, well, there's a new government in Kiev. Oh, that's our chance. It's our chance. Well, if they're resetting there, we can have a reset here. But it shouldn't take that. I think the next step in the expectation is we can have votes like this whenever we want. If things aren't suiting us being part of a larger government, we can vote our way out of that, right? We don't have to wait for a revolution. We don't have to wait for a government to be overthrown or cops being set on fire in the streets or military confrontations. We can just have votes and have these conversations. And it's very exciting to see that a new expectation for dispute resolution on this global scale is being set out of this conflict. And we can only hope that it continues in this relative manner compared to the extremely violent alternative that is a legitimate possibility in this kind of situation.
Right, and unfortunately, a lot of the Western countries don't see it that way, and they've been very public about the idea that these referendums are illegal under international law. And really, the Crimean situation was only able to happen because Russian troops were already on the ground and precluded Ukraine from taking any sort of action to prevent the vote from happening.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Jason Ditz of antiwar.com. You can find more of his writings and work there. And please support antiwar.com every chance you get. All right. We go now to Skype, and I know we got a bunch of people lined up. We're going to go from top to bottom here. So if you want to call in, get on the top of the chat. Great. Let's see. Dave writes, great monologue regarding communication. Send some Bitcoin your way as a means of saying thanks. And I think he's got a confirmation code there. This show fucking rules. Thank you very much, Dave. Randy is got a contact request. Not following directions. Chris writes, hey, Adam, I'm just ready. I saw you read my message. All right, let's see if we can get Chris back on the show here. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, what's up, Adam?
Hey,
what's up, Adam?
Please turn off your live stream there.
Please turn off your live stream.
I'm hearing myself in the
Sorry
delay.
about that.
No worries. Can we get some video for you?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. What's on your mind today?
I was just wondering if we could talk a little bit about Rand Paul.
Hit it.
So I know you're a big fan of his father, but I get the impression that at times you're antagonistic to some of the things he says, some of the more quote-unquote conservative things he says. Now, there are a lot of libertarians that really despise Rand Paul. They say things like, oh, he's really disgracing his father's legacy. Just wanted to see if I could get your opinion on that.
Yeah, I don't really like that kind of language, disgracing your father's legacy. You know, that's very much a shorthand for a poorly thought out position. Rand Paul is a conservative. He's not his father. I support him. I love what he accomplishes. I'm glad that he's in the Senate. And I think he does a lot of great work. But he's not a libertarian. And that's fine. He's a very, in terms of positions and issues, he's aligned with libertarians in a lot of important ways. A Rand Paul presidency would, move us in the right direction from a libertarian perspective of reducing the coercion and violence of government. But, there is, for those of us who are libertarians, because we believe in the philosophy of liberty, the non-aggression principle, self-ownership, when you see someone, there is a certain emotional reaction when you see someone as Ron Paul's son and you expect him to be speaking from that same philosophical perspective. There's when you fall for, the celebrity culture kind of emotional connection with someone, it hurts, and there's a disappointment there. It's very visceral. And I think, there's a lot of angst, and I'll admit that I went through a little bit of that myself. And but I'm over it. I think the people who really believe in freedom owe it to themselves to come to a specific rational position about Rand and get over the kind of petty insulting and getting over that emotional disappointment, because it doesn't help it get more freedom or having any kind of emotional attachment to a politician for that matter. But, so if people decide that they want to support Rand Paul because they think that supporting him in the things that he does talk about that are valuable from a libertarian perspective is the most valuable use of their resources and their activism, I would strongly but very politely and respectfully disagree and, encourage them to stay active and stay engaged if they're really motivated by those same principles. But at the same time, Rand Paul has made it very clear that he's not motivated by those same principles, and that's okay.
Now, when you say that Rand Paul is not a libertarian, and you're right, he said that himself, do you really think that he's not a libertarian in his heart? I mean, as the son of Ron Paul, having grown up around Murray Rothbard, all the Mises Institute guys, do you think maybe he's just playing the political game and toning down the rhetoric, which many would say was the downfall of his father?
No, I think that's what his father was doing, really, was playing the political game and toning down the rhetoric and taking, if anything, the message out of its philosophical context and putting it in a very specific legislation kind of application, telling people why he's voting against everything is Dr. No, right? And a lot of people put forth this theory. A lot of libertarians do, and if that's really his strategy, and he's got to stick to that, that's his business ultimately. But I refuse to believe that Ron Paul would raise someone as a liar, as deceptive as that, and I think he would know that that's what he was doing, and that in and of itself would be highly counterproductive. I don't think he's a liar. I have more. I think it's an insult to Rand Paul to say, "Oh, he's really a libertarian. He's just faking it," because you're saying that he's lying his way and he's deceiving people and doing far worse things and advocating for things that he doesn't believe in and re-entrenching people's statist beliefs. If that's the case, that I think is extremely counterproductive. So it's possible. I can't cast out that theory as a possibility, but I think it's extremely unlikely and something that I'd be less likely to support than, hey, he's an honest conservative.
Okay. So if I'm reading you right, would you rather see someone get up there who would be willing to say, like, listen, I want to abolish the government, taxation is theft, things like that?
Yes, absolutely. I think what is ultimately most important in achieving a free society is changing the paradigm and waking people up. If you go back in the history of the libertarian movement, you can go back to Plato and Socrates if you really want to go way, way, way back, and of course, hundreds of other great thinkers along the way that got us to where we were in the 20th century, where I think Murray Rothbard was probably, or maybe Lysander Spooner, but not in the same way, but really Murray Rothbard first codified libertarianism as a comprehensive philosophy. And you might not agree with certain points, and I have very small bones to pick with certain things he said. I'm not a blind Rothbardian,
Right.
but I think he really deserves credit for that. And with his writing in the 60s and 70s and everything else that he wrote, that even through the 80s and the rest of his life, that was so powerful. But really, Ethics of Liberty was a life-changing book for me. For a New Liberty, the New Libertarian Manifesto, woke up thousands and thousands of people. But at that point, when this philosophy was codified as this moral philosophy that's based on not just rational examination or a utilitarian economic perspective, as Mises and Hayek perhaps, and other economist type writers did before so very well, in a philosophical moral sense, codified under Rothbard that message. And the movement kind of split then, and it went two ways. And there were the people that said, no, this is the truth. Statism is wrong. It is morally wrong. It is the initiation of force. All coercion is wrong. And other people said, oh, well, if we actually stick to that message, people are going to be shocked because it means that we have to abolish government because government is fundamentally incompatible with freedom. And Murray Rothbard went, yeah, that's the point. And then you had the Koch brothers come in and subvert everybody who went the other way and said, well, let's compromise. Let's invent this thing called minarchism. Yeah. And it's like, well, we're going to advocate for cutting out 90% of a cancer. But in and of itself, the idea of minarchism, I think, is a poison to the message. And I think it's very important to separate those. And I support everybody who's doing good work to move the ball forward by my definition. And regardless of their philosophical orientation, I support all of it. This is why, to the extent that I do, I very much support Rand Paul. But as a senator and doing what he's doing, and a lot of the stands that he takes, but it's not going to serve to wake people up. And if anything, a lot of people have come to misunderstand libertarianism and think that various forms of minarchism are actually libertarianism when they're not.
All right.
I see you have some other question burning or something to consider. Please feel free to start talking and simply talk your way through it.
No, that was a pretty satisfactory answer. I just feel like the issue of Rand Paul is a pretty divisive one in libertarian circles, and I just tend to think that he's playing more of a political game rather than outright lying. If you ask me, I think Rand Paul probably believes the same things that his father does. And one of the reasons I say that is because if you look at like the Mises Institute guys like Lou Rockwell, these are guys that literally attack any libertarian that strays from the Rothbardian Misesian paradigm in any way. Like, they call them the Beltway libertarians, the Reason guys, the Cato guys. They're attacking these guys constantly.
Mm-hmm.
They don't attack Rand Paul though now, but Rand Paul by the Mises Institute or the Rockwellian standard would definitely be up for critique if his last name wasn't Paul. You know what I mean?
Well, I think he is, but when Rand Paul does things or talks about things that I disagree with, I'll talk about it. I'm open about it, but I don't want to cut him down because he's doing powerful things for good. And you're right that Rand has become a controversial figure among libertarians, and it's sad that we as a movement, if I may collectivize American libertarians here, and I think this is a fair characterization. Please correct me if my opinion disagrees with your observation, but that there is still an emotional disagreement within the movement about the attitude towards Rand. And you mention him in some circles, and you're going to get people upset. And it's like, really, that is wrong. That is, I have no problem saying, as any of Rand's statist ideas, getting emotional about a politician or deriding other people's work who are libertarians that they think is doing good work is wrong. If someone is a libertarian and a voluntarist and they're supporting Rand because it's their opinion that that's the best use of their resources or their energy or that moves the ball forward, you can respectfully disagree. But to have some emotional being upset because someone is misapplying their own resources as an activist when what they should be doing is making themselves happy anyways, doing the activism that they find most satisfying, that's wrong. And that's something I think our movement needs to get over right now.
Yeah, I agree. I just every time, I'm not blaming you in any way, but every time you post a status like conservatives are not libertarians or something to that effect, Rand Paul's name will come up as if it was implied that that's what you were talking about, even though you probably weren't. You were probably just talking about conservatives in general.
Actually, I think I know the status, if I may interrupt to share this, that I did from just yesterday. Let me see if I can pull this up real quick. But it was the definition of a conservatarian. Right. And this is not about Rand. And if anything, anybody who knows Rand should know that this can't be about Rand, because Rand does not call himself a libertarian. And I respect him for that. I would, if he was trying to pass himself off as a libertarian still and doing everything he's doing, then I'd be like, whoa, dude, that's really slimeball. But he's not. So that's not who I'm talking about here. But conservatarian, someone who identifies as a libertarian but is really a conservative. They may do this because it sounds cooler, because they are trying to subvert the freedom movement. They tend to believe that government monopolies are necessary for what they consider essential functions that they can't imagine being provided for by the free market, just like liberals and other statists. Yeah. And that's not about Rand. That's not, because Rand is but there are people who do that. There are people who are like Rand, and this is something else that is worth pointing out that our movement needs to address, and I'm doing my best to in the conversation like this, although it is kind of an inside baseball thing. I'd rather talk about the bigger issues, is that there are a lot of people who are exactly like Rand's public stated positions are. They are conservatives. They are legitimately principled, honest, small government conservatives. And they call themselves libertarians because they want to convince people that really are libertarians to be more involved in the Republican Party or to be more involved in supporting Rand. And that's really deceptive. And I do have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Awesome.
I just wanted to see where you stand on that. I mean, so would you'd say you'd be more adamant about supporting Ron Paul than Rand?
Absolutely. Because when you speak from the philosophy, and I have significant disagreements even with Dr. Paul the Senior in his application and how we get there and what he advocates for. I'm much closer to Rothbard or Lysander Spooner in that regard, in attitude towards the Constitution and the current state of government. And that's why I think that what Ron does, though, is in and of itself a compromise. And Chris Cantwell said this when Republicans were coming to libertarians after the primaries. Why don't you compromise and vote for Mitt Romney? And it's like, no, Ron Paul was the compromise. Having a president rule over us at all under a constitutional government. That is the compromise. That is already a major compromise of true freedom. And, Ron Paul has incredible value as someone to support because he speaks from the philosophy. He describes himself as a voluntarist. I disagree with him on how he applies that to certain practical issues of current states of government, but that he speaks from that is what wakes people up. That he speaks true to those principles. The arguments he makes are not conservative arguments, they're libertarian arguments. They're rational. They're not about preservation of existing social institutions or about emotional appeals or about utilitarian agendas. No, they are principled positions, and that's why any libertarian could wholeheartedly support Dr. Ron Paul.
So, in your opinion, is Ron Paul a Rothbardian? Is he an anarchist?
Well, he's a voluntarist, and I think he just has a unique, different interpretation of that has served him incredibly well as a politician to serve as a gateway for so many people to Rothbardianism. He was definitely a disciple of Rothbard. They've worked together. They wrote together. There's some theory that Rothbard was involved in the newsletters or the David Duke outreach strategy, which is almost embarrassing for me to, one reason I don't want to call myself a Rothbardian. And I don't think anybody should ever identify, by another person's last name. We're independent human beings. We think for ourselves. But the philosophy of freedom definitely has some, universal understanding here. So, I think is Ron Paul an anarchist? No, he's not. And that's where, in a sense, we disagree, because I think libertarian means that. He thinks that you can have some form of government that is non-coercive, that is voluntary. I would make the case at that point it's not government, and even a territorial monopoly of a land management corporation or whatever you want to reduce government to when you get it back to the Constitution, it's still not voluntary. And is, again, getting, like, if we went back to the founding, guess what? 200 years later, we'd end up here because government is a cancer. You cut out 90%, it grows back. And I think Dr. Paul the Senior would probably be closer to me if you talk to him about, and we've had several conversations in person, never at this philosophical depth, but I would guess from my reading of his work that he would probably be more with me in more of a long-term scale. But more importantly, he is advocating not conservative values, not practical values, not emotional appeals. He's advocating rational analysis and philosophy, and that's what wakes people up.
Right. All right. So,
is that not enough anti-movement drama for the day? Did you get your dose? All right. One more question, sir.
Oh no, I just wanted to talk philosophically a little bit now. So, in your vision of, you describe yourself as a voluntarist more so than an anarchist, I guess.
They're just labels, and anarchist is just a terrible word for it because it has other political connotations with left anarchism, which aren't really even anarchism, but voluntarism describes it much more specifically. But to me, libertarian is the word because it's you believe in freedom.
Right. In the totally free society, then I'll say, are you in favor of the use of any violence?
Absolutely, in defense. Although, let me rephrase that. Am I in favor of it? No, I believe it's legitimate and possibly beneficial under very specific certain circumstances. But what we should be striving for is universal nonviolence. That's the definition of a free society.
Okay. So you mean a society where there's no legal possibility for the use of aggressive violence? Right.
Correct.
Okay. Because I've heard voluntarist libertarians, in fact, interestingly enough, Danny Panzella has said this, that no violence should be used at all. Like if somebody were to commit a murder, the only way to deal with that would be through like ostracizing him or refusing to do business, but private defense.
And that's kind of what I was referring to there, and that we can strive towards that, and we can get to that point. And that's what I think requires a much more fundamental shift. But I think in the development of the market alternatives to government justice, we will naturally find less violent solutions. And I've thought about this, and this gets into the real esoteric theory of, in a perfect world, how do once you've achieved a stateless society, at first, private institutions or nonviolent public institutions, as in contrast to violent government institutions, will resemble what we have in government. You're going to have local community or private this or that, police forces, prisons, and so on. Mm-hmm. But eventually, the market will demand better options, and different things will be allowed to develop. And if you can, if someone is a murderer, is it, or maybe that's an extreme example, right? Because that's someone who's made themselves a threat. Can we isolate them on their own property? Hypothetically, can we achieve the exact same goal of safety for everyone else from this person and isolate them without violating even their rights? Just because you've murdered someone, you can say yes, and as you are a threat, you give up your rights. But if you're not an immediate threat, can your rights be respected? Can the value of your life be preserved? Can you be made a productive member of society again? Those are the things that we should be seeking as alternatives. But I understand that's a much longer ways off in human social and psychological evolution. So we're going to let someone else get a chance to call in. Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Chris. But we've got just a few minutes. Clint is available, or rather Aaron, and we're really excited to get an update from him. This is the gentleman who was doing the live confrontation with the police for us. Oh, looks like we got him and lost him. Let's try one more time. And we're really excited to get an update.
Let me turn off the stream.
Yes, please. Are we talking to Clint or Aaron now?
This is Aaron.
Aaron, can you give us some video?
Yeah, 1 minute.
We don't have a minute. We have 4 minutes left in the show. All right.
All right.
There's Aaron. Excellent. Thanks for joining us again.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. So we are having our protest against police corruption in Enterprise, Alabama on 4/20, the Sunday, and it will be on the 84 bypass and the Bull Weevil Circle intersection. If anybody's familiar with Enterprise, it's right in front of the only Kangaroo gas station. And also, we have a GoFundMe account for our defense and civil rights case, and it's roughly going to be about $45,000 or $4,500 for us to get lawyers. And I mean, they all say that our case is very strong. We didn't break any laws by any means, and then we were brutalized. And we have the story on the page. The thing is GoFundMe.com/8DPHBK. Again, that's 8DPHBK. And
what is that? Sorry, what is that code?
No,
what's it for?
The GoFundMe account.
Oh, okay, okay. To find the GoFundMe page. Well, hey, let's just make it easier for our listeners. Can you get, as soon as we get off, can you get that link on Facebook.com/Adam versus the Man post it there, and we can send people there right now?
Yep.
Excellent.
Sure.
Excellent. See, technology, we can use it. Excellent. We got instant connection. People don't have what is this memorizing number stuff? Isn't that's so last century?
Yeah, we don't know that.
Everybody knows where Adam versus the Man is on Facebook, so please check out the link there, especially if you can be in Alabama and support this. Aaron and Clint called in on Monday, and we're actually in the hospital getting treated for injuries from the prior day's events, getting arrested and slammed to the ground by a couple cops for protesting police brutality. I hope that you have a lot of people come out who have heard that story now. Has it been getting around locally?
A little bit. We have had about 15 people at us from your last podcast, or not your last podcast, but the podcast that we were on. Mm-hmm. And 2 of them were from Dothan, which is a city about 20 minutes from us. And 1 of them was from Enterprise, which is the city we're going to protest in. And it's promoted us quite a little bit, I guess you could say. And I really appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, man. We'll keep up the good work. We'll wish you the best of luck, and hopefully have some good video from this Saturday and or Sunday, and you can give us a report on Monday, or we can share some of those videos with our audience. I know we're at the end of the show, but we're going to take a few minutes here and get into... Oh, Did we hear back from Ed Fortune? Is he? Oh, really? Is he here? All right, let's get. We have him in our contacts. We're gonna go long today so that we can bring in New Jersey Weedman. Excellent. Oh, it looks like he's not online. Let's give him a try here. I don't think this is going to work, but we'll at least go through the rest of the chats that we've got on Skype and address any questions that are sitting there. Now, it looks like New Jersey Weedman is still offline. Sorry we couldn't get to that today, but we do have. We'll go a little bit long and see. We've got Pam Tangretti. Tobacco just doesn't have that burnt oregano aroma. Danny's wearing a horse blanket. All right, Eric Mackey. Hey, Adam, whenever you're ready. Nope. Oh, sorry, we missed you earlier today. And Jeffrey Langan is. Let's see. Well, let's see if we can get Jeffrey on real quick here. Jeffrey, let's see. What did he's someone we talked to on Facebook yesterday. Jeffrey, welcome to the show.
Adam, how you doing?
Excellent. Jeffrey's from Oregon. He's a candidate for the 41st District as a Libertarian for state representative. And Jeffrey, I'm excited to hear that we had some role in provoking you to such a dangerous and irresponsible act as running for public office. But at least we got you off the couch, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, I'm running for the 41st District here in Oregon. I'm having a problem framing environmental problems as far as a libertarian approach. I know it has to do something with, property rights, but how do you frame environmental problems in a libertarian stance?
Wow, man, that's a great question. I hope that whatever answer I give you can be of help, but I can only tell you what I would do. And most importantly, the thing to keep in mind is to know your audience and who you're talking to and what their concerns are. And if it's my concern is the environment, and the only way I see to address preserving the environment is by turning to government and turning to that coercion. How do you reach that person with an alternative? And if you can't get them to accept the fundamental premise that government is violence and government is force and coercion, it's kind of tough, right? If you can't convince them of that fundamental premise and they think government is this magical force that, never does anything immoral because it's government, you're really not going to get any headway with those people. I think in those situations, you might be better off talking about it in sort of philosophical terms first. If you can't get them to understand enough of that, even if they don't fully embrace it, but if you can't get them to understand enough of that they understand at least the fundamental problem of turning to government, then none of these other more specific issue arguments are going to work. But the first thing I would ever hit someone with is, okay, well, we all care about preserving the environment. We all have should have a right to access to natural resources. Can we resolve this nonviolently? Can we do this coercively? Can we figure it out? And the answer is right now, no. Honestly, no. And you have to be upfront as a single member of the state legislature. You're not going to be able to automatically employ all of these policies. But what you can say is that what you do offer as a libertarian that is in line with your values, that you would hope are shared with their values, is tort reform. And that is making sure that there is accountability through government as a justice system, which is really just a legal system, right? But that you can apply the legal system better to remove the lack of accountability that corporations and major polluters enjoy because of government. And there's nothing wrong with saying, well, as long as we have government as the arbitrator of disputes, how can it arbitrate more fairly? If it's not going to be as honest as a voluntary system, if it's going to be a coercive system, how much can we at least bend it to simulate that? And the most important thing you can do, and this should be a huge thing to appeal to people when you can't reach them on these philosophical issues or these bigger understandings about how government works, you can say, well, look, who are the polluters? How do we actually hold them accountable based on a legitimate moral system of property rights? And it's, there's tort reform. You can reform how it works. You can actually, as a state legislature, if this is an important issue there, and if it's an important issue to you, say, I'm going to put forth legislation that is going to hold polluters accountable, not by some environmental regulation crap, but by an actual specific standard of what damages do they cause. And those damages will not be estimated by the companies or by a bureaucrat. They will be estimated based on a fair market value of that property at full value, and they will be accountable for those damages that way. I think as a libertarian, you have a lot to offer for practical, immediate policy initiatives without touching on those bigger philosophical issues that are still entirely in line with what you believe. Does that help at all?
Definitely does. The other question I had too was also on abortion. I know the Libertarian Party is kind of split on their stance on abortion. What's your personal stance? Is, banning all abortion right because it's protecting the fetus, or what's your stance on abortion?
My personal stance as a man is that I should have very little to say on this issue at all. But I would never want government to be used to address it, regardless of what you think, about abortion as a moral issue, whether it justifies coercion being used against a pregnant woman. And you'd be very hard pressed to make that case in any kind of institutionalized practical sense. I think we can all agree, and I believe life starts at conception, and abortion is ending a human life. Does that mean it's always universally wrong? No. Does that mean we're ever justified in intervening in that individual decision with violence? I don't think so. But more importantly, we can all agree that an abortion, whether you're pro-choice or pro-life or whatever other crappy, emotionally manipulative label you want to slap on yourself, you can agree that an abortion is not the optimal outcome for anyone. Even if you're totally pro-choice, you're not pro-abortion. You're pro the option, and that's one of the ways pro-lifers really demonize people who are pro-choice is saying that they're pro-abortion. No, they're not. And I think if you can speak about it in those terms, you can bring a lot of people together and say, well, what do we actually do? What can we do as a society to reduce abortion? Without turning to violence, without turning to the coercion of government. So to someone who is pro-choice, the libertarian might want to appeal to that if you can't fundamentally convince them. But from a policy perspective, great. I don't want government to do anything to enforce any of these personal decisions, what you do with your body, even if it affects someone else's body. I do not want to see a government solution to the problem of abortion. And to someone who's pro-life, you point out all the problems with how the ways government has encouraged abortion by trying to fight it and all the ways it makes the problem worse. And if and I'll say this to all the pro-life people, just if I may, for all the pro-life people in America, if you spent just a fraction of the energy that you spend yelling at other people over stupid nonsense and telling them they're wrong on supporting individual mothers, there would be a hell of a lot less abortions in the world today than there are. And it is a horrific misallocation of resources to say, well, there's a problem with abortion. It's a suboptimal outcome. Let's use government and the political process to address it. So I hope that helps. I know that's not necessarily your be-all, end-all messaging, but at least giving you some ammunition there that might help.
Okay, and going back to the environmental question, so what you're saying, there should be some government body though regulating pollution, because if you had a complete anarchist society, there'd be no regulation.
No, that's not what I'm saying. And in that state, if you have a voluntary stateless society where everybody respects the property rights of others, then you don't have the kind of pollution that we have today. Any kind of pollution that affects another person is considered a violation of their self-ownership. So if we lived in a society that was as aware enough to be voluntary, then you would have a society that was aware enough to not support corporations or companies that are engaging in pollution. A company that violates the rights of another means that everybody that is supporting them, that is buying their product, that is participating, is also participating in that. The only reason they get away with the pollution they do today is because people don't demand self-governance. They don't demand full accountability for property rights, and they're willing to accept that they are going to patronize companies that are going to pollute. And the reason they don't have a choice is because of corporatism limiting competition, but also that we are fundamentally right now not as conscientious of consumers as we can and should be. And that's the better way to have a sustainable way of addressing the issue of pollution.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just want to say I also was a former Marine and served in Iraq in 2003 and 2005 in El Anbar province the second time. Went all the way to Baghdad the first time. war is hell, and I definitely am against all foreign interventions and definitely stand with you 110% on those issues.
Oh, I appreciate that, and I'm glad that you were able to share that, and you've come to a better place now. But since we're only 10 minutes over time here, why don't you take just a minute and if you would blow a little smoke up my ass about how Adam versus the Man had a role in inspiring you to run for office and engage this way.
Well, just watching your videos and coming more closer towards a real anarchist approach, more libertarian approach. I used to be a former Republican myself. I was a precinct committee person during the campaign for Ron Paul. I did vote for John McCain in 2008, which was a huge mistake because I was a neoconservative. My eyes weren't open yet. Watching your videos, listening to Ron Paul, reading Murray Rothbard, the Mises Institute have just opened my eyes, and it's really been an awakening for me.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it, and I only put you on the spot like that because I remember the message you sent me on Facebook, and I just wanted to take a little credit for that. I really appreciate it, and it's the best kind of feedback that I can get to know that we're inspiring people to take a stand and get out and be active. Thanks so much for the call. That's all the time we have for today. That was Jeffrey Lanigan from Oregon, running for the 41st District as a Libertarian, and it's been a wonderful week. If you want to hang out on Sunday, we'll be at the north side of the Santa Monica Pier at 3:30 p.m. Don't forget to go to adamversustheman.com/invest to support the show. If you want to send me music for the pre-show, I know we got it started a little late today, but send me music. We're going to have some more fun with that. And as always, send your love mail to adam@adamversustheman.com. Cool, huh?